Good morning and welcome to another Nonprofit Finance Basics. I am joining you today from my own living room. So we see different artwork in the background. I know folks have commented a lot on my frog painting. Today we get to see another one. We are excited to welcome back our friendly neighborhood accountant, Donald Wells, who's been joining us for the past several months to talk about the specifics of nonprofit finance. You're joining us today for a riveting discussion on the board responsibilities, the legal and finance responsibilities of board members. Before we jump right into your forum, I want to do a little housekeeping and make sure you remember how this works. Our session today is being recorded, which means that you will have access to this recording after this forum is complete. You will receive it at the email address that you registered with to this event on Eventbrite. You can also use closed captioning. You'll find it at the bottom bar of your screen. If you click on more, you'll see show subtitles. You'll see show subtitles. And if you click show subtitles, it will pop up on your screen. You can click and drag those around your screen anywhere you'd like. And you can also resize them if you click on subtitle settings in that same menu. We use the chat box to report any issues having to do with this forum. So if you have volume issues, subtitle issues, anything like that, can't see the slides, that's where you would report that. If you have content-related questions, please go ahead and put those content-related questions in the Q&A box. The Q&A box will be monitored for the content-related questions. Today, we will also be using the chat box for some engagement items that Donald has planned for us. So keep an eye on the chat box for that purpose as well. And if you have questions on how to use it, feel free to put those questions in the chat box and we will be sure to answer them there. After this forum is over, you'll receive a survey. Please fill out the survey. That helps us know how we're doing here. And with that, we'll turn it over to Donald.
Thank you, Danielle. And I don't want to, let me see if I can share my screen. Hopefully you're seeing the screen on my slideshow. I don't want to minimize what Danielle said and what she's doing on two fronts. First and foremost is please, we're going to try to be very interactive in the chat. It's hard being that we're remote, but we're going to make an attempt for that. Danielle's artwork is phenomenal, but what's even more phenomenal is her commitment along with the Columbus Foundation to the not-for-profit industry. She is suffering at home today with an illness and still able to power through for us. So we're super excited about that and that all that she brings and the Columbus Foundation brings to the industry. So thank you for that, Danielle. And I don't want to lose sight of the work and effort that you're putting into this. So let's get started. First, thank you as always to the Columbus Foundation for the opportunity. Thank you to those of you who are participating. I love the feedback and I love the fact that when I see you out at an event or a metropolitan luncheon, you grab me and you say, hey, Don, how about this question or how about that question? So continue to do that. I'm working very hard to build a great team around me so that if someone has an HR issue or someone has a strategic planning issue or someone has an operational issue, that I'm not the person to answer that, but I can tap that right person. So continue to give me the feedback of, hey, Don, these are the types of things we need. There are some really good providers throughout the city and the state that are here to work for you. So I wanted to say that first and foremost. We're going to go through the legal responsibilities and the financial responsibilities of boards. And it's going to be pretty straightforward. I mean, there's not a whole lot to it. It's a legal document, and believe it or not, it's pretty much cut and dry. We're also going to do some, how do you know that you've got a good board engagement? How do How do you evaluate board engagement? And then finally, we're going to finish back at the legal responsibility, because I really want that to be the takeaway. Board engagement is important, but I want the legal responsibilities to be takeaway. There's not a new and original thought in this slide. I know there's a couple of people on this that I've stolen a ton of this information off of. I've stolen it from the Attorney General. There's not an original piece of information. So I'm just blessed to be the voice of it, to put it out to you. So with that, we're going to get started. I'm going to try to, I've got so many monitors. I'm going to try and keep my everything on time so that we get out of here at a good and reasonable time. So let's see, there's our slide. You know, I'm just going to stop because it caught my eye. This photo, I love this photo. And it's crazy what technology can do. That photo was taken about 3 years ago with an iPhone. So shout out to my wife for taking that photo. All right, so we're going to get started. We're going to start talking about the types of boards. And there's one reason that we're going to talk about this. One, I want you to have this slide. This slide is a very important slide as you deal with types of boards. And I'm going to check this chat to make sure that I've done it well. I really want to make sure that you can see the slides right now. And I don't see anybody saying they can't, so great. This is a really important slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail. I've done presentations with boards where this one slide takes us all day long. An overview of it is that generally there's considered 5 types of boards that exist in the not-for-profit space. And this goes through them, has some categories to kind of let you know, okay, where do you fit and things of that nature. A great slide for you to take away and maybe study and read on, but the most important aspect of this slide, and I hope you can see it, is the very top line. The top line is the only line that's consistent, irregardless of the type of board you are. You know, a type of board of staff could be a board that at an animal shelter that actually walks the dogs and volunteers their time. A lot of people will call that a working board. That's not exactly what I would call it, but a lot of people would call that a working board, all the way up to a figurehead board. And the examples that I use locally, primarily I like to use the Ohio State University. I said the, so I don't get sued. The Ohio State University and Ohio Health. Those are the big organizations that I like to use as examples when I talk about figurehead boards. And if any of those board members are around, I know that you do more. You're more than just a figurehead, but those are the examples I like to use. So when you look at that spectrum of types of organization and types of boards, there's one commonality, and that they all have the same legal responsibilities. Yes, if you are a board member at a small organization that has musicians and the musicians' parents sit on that board and that's what makes up the board, or if you're at the Ohio State University, you have the exact same legal responsibilities. Now, the way that you carry out those are different. That's what we're going to talk about a little bit in the chat. But first and foremost, I wanted to go through what the legal responsibilities are, because we all have those. And I run across so many boards that really don't understand that they have legal responsibilities. And that's why they're there. This chart kind of lets you know that's why you're there. You're there to fulfill your legal obligation. And we'll talk about it later. Mission is important. Love of mission is important. Wanting to be involved for the right reason and to make the world a better place. Those are all very important things. But as a board member, you are there for the legal responsibilities at a not-for-profit organization. All right. So once you define the types of boards, there's some benefit in helping the CEO and the board understand how they relate, but that's a topic for a different day. This is a guide, a pamphlet. It's only about 14, 15 pages long. You can find it at the Ohio Attorney General website. It's a guide for charity board members. Highly recommend. My buddy that's on the call right now, Dean, probably 7 years ago, 5 years ago, turned me on to this brochure. I highly recommend that as a organization, this brochure is part of your board onboarding. It's part of your annual board review processes. We're going to hit the high points of it, but the entire brochure becomes really important to understand. You can get this from the Ohio Attorney General website. And if you Google Guide for Charity Board Members, you will get this pamphlet. Like I said, it's 15 or so pages. It's easy to print and distribute. Board responsibilities in the state of Ohio fall into 4 categories: duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of compliance, and duty to maintain accounts. The one thing that is very interesting is that the state of Ohio has one additional duty that most states do not have, and that's the duty to maintain accounts. So I'm going to pause right now, and I'm going to ask you in the chat, without peeking ahead or without pulling up the brochure, what does duty of care mean? And I'm just going to take a moment to see what you say in the chat, and we're going to go each one. Duty of care, duty of loyalty, compliance, and maintain accounts. I'm interested in what you think those mean before we look at what the Attorney General actually defines them as. So if you could, just a couple of things in the chat to get me going, and I would appreciate that. Duty of care to the public. Oh, I like that. I like that. See that the mission is carried out, okay? Being invested, competence, continuity of board and bylaws, honoring your mission. Hey, Sherry, good to see you. Okay. Committed to mission. Okay. So let's do this. We're going to pause right there. We're going to go through duty of care, but continue to throw things out. And then we're going to go duty of loyalty. We're going to do them one at a time instead of trying to do them all at once. So thank you for that. It's very interesting. And your feedback is very good. Duty of care means a trust, and this is directly language out of the brochure, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to interpret it for you. A trustee has the responsibility to be active in the charity's affairs. At a minimum, that means attending and participating in board and committee meetings. Additionally, board members should stay informed about the organizational operations to ensure that the staff follow the board's policies. So very interesting. And this is why I love this conversation, because so many of you said mission, mission, mission. Mission is vital. We don't want mission drip or anything like that. But duty of care is to make sure that the organization is following their policies and procedures. Duty of care is to make sure that the things that need to be taken care of are taken care of. If you were to go to the brochure, this is a very high bar, but if you were to go to the brochure, the Attorney General says the expectation is that you as a trustee extend the same amount of care in relation to the nonprofit's business operations as you do your personal finances. That's a heavy bar. That is a heavy bar that we shouldn't take lightly. I recently just built a home, and the amount of paperwork I went through, the amount of phone calls, the amount of conversations with contractors, the amount of all of those things. I need to determine, am I using that same energy as a board member where I sit on a board? And that's the duty of care. I used to be very, very upset when I have a great person and I ask them to join a board and they would tell me no. And I would say, there's no way that you can tell me no, because we only meet an hour a quarter. I did not understand the breadth of the responsibilities related to duty of care. Duty of care truly gets into caring for the policies and the procedures and the operation of the charity's affairs. So okay, Don. So what exactly does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Here's an example. It's not a great example, but here's an example. Let's say that you have a policy regarding cash disbursements, how cash disbursements are handled. How are you as a board member making sure that that policy is being followed? Let's say you have a conflict of interest policy. How, as a board member or as a board, are you determining that the conflict of interest policy is being followed? So when you really start to drill down into it, it's going to your policy and procedure manuals and determining that they are being followed. You've got to stay informed about the organizational operations. Well, what does that mean, Don? Well, if the executive director is applying for a grant, hopefully at some point in those board meetings, that grant is discussed and the requirements of the grant, the legal obligations of the grant, and what the grant's calling you to do is being discussed, instead of cheering the fact that we picked up another $100,000. Okay. Obviously, we want to cheer and we want to celebrate that. But as a board member, you got to go just a step further and say, okay, what is our deliverable as a result of this? And can we make it happen? And how are we going to determine that we're making it happen? So that's duty of care. Okay. That's the first heavy lift. And I believe these all are heavy lifts, which is one of the reasons that about 6 or 7 years ago, I think at one time I sat on like 17 boards. And as I started to understand all of this stuff, I think I sit on 2 boards now. I can't give everyone the effort and the energy that these things require. Duty of care. Hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully that helps a little bit. The next duty is duty of loyalty. So I've got the chat open. I'm looking for your comments. What is duty of loyalty before I go into it? No conflicts of interest. Loyalty to the mission. Confidentiality. Oh, I like that. I like that. Being an advocate. Kim, way to go, Kim. Good job being an advocate for the organization. That's good. Don't miss meetings and invest financially. Okay. All right. So what does the Attorney General say loyalty is? Duty of loyalty requires that the interest of the charity and its objectives takes precedence over a board's member personal interests or those of family or friends. A trustee or board member always must act fairly in the best interest of the organization without concerns for their own interests. So prioritizing the organization, Fred, great. Here's why I challenge people on this, and I don't have this as a true example, but it's an example that I like to use to think about. Most people in town know of Jazz Arts Group, a great organization, a really good group of people. And I use them as an example when I talk about loyalty. Most people that sit on that board are musically inclined and enjoy music. Some even have bands or musical groups that they perform with. So when that person takes a gig, have they violated the duty of loyalty for JAG? I don't know. I don't know, but I think it's something that has to be considered and has to be talked about, because it goes a little bit further than conflict of interest. I sat on, and Danielle talks about, I sat on the board of Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So when I go out in public, can I wear a profane t-shirt? Now, obviously I wouldn't anyway, but should I? And if I do that, am I not, Fred, back to your point, prioritizing the organization's mission? So it's in my daily walk, that I am thinking about that organization's mission and how I reflect upon that organization every day, above my interest and above, believe it or not, the interest of my family and friends. A high bar. You guys looked at it and, prioritizing the organization, reflecting the organization positively. Kevin, I think that's probably the best summation of it, but we really want to dig down into what does that mean representing, and think all the way through that. I could wear certain things that may not reflect well on the organization. I could be certain places that would not reflect well on the organization. So it's really about thinking through all of those ramifications from loyalty. At one point, I sat on a board that was a drug prevention organization. And I sat next to a longtime board member, and again, my buddy Dean that's on the call was doing a presentation on the duties, and he talked about duty of loyalty. And she leaned over to me and said, "Oh, Don, we're straight because we don't smoke weed at home." And I'm like, yeah, I don't really think that's what we mean by loyalty, right? It goes a little bit deeper than obviously following the mission or the organization, but it goes a little bit deeper than that. So duty of loyalty, that's what it means. It's really asking your board members to put the charity above their own interest in their daily operations. Again, something I don't know that we're always thinking about. Most of us have conflict of interest policies. We want to make sure our conflict of interest policies go far enough and are far reaching that would create the opportunity for things like this to be discussed. And again, I use the example of Jack. I have no reason to think that this is an issue, and I'm not even saying that it would be. But if I was at Jack, I would want something in the conflict of interest to be far reaching enough that if somebody had a band, that some way, somehow there was conversation about what gigs they took and what gigs they didn't take. That would be my personal opinion. So duty of loyalty. Thank you for your comments on that. Let me see if I have anything else. We're getting ready to go to duty of compliance. So let me see what you think about duty of compliance. Oh, the last thing on duty of loyalty I want to say is that most people think that conflicts of interest are bad. If you really look at the duty of loyalty, we all have conflicts of interest. If you really think about it, conflicts of interest are not in of themselves bad. They're bad when they're not addressed. So as long as we're addressing and we're making decisions about the conflicts, I don't know that they're bad because we all have them. So I wanted to make sure I made that statement. Duty of compliance, management of risk, compliance with state, federal grants and laws, right? Not sure you make sure you totally understand. Loyalty. I'm not sure if that's loyalty or compliance, Mark. I like that. So you guys all have a really good idea of compliance, but this is where I'm going to challenge your thought processes a little bit, because it's the board members that have the duty to be faithful in the organization's purpose and mission. They also must adhere to the organization's governing documents and to the laws and regulations that relate to the charity and its operations. Here's a question for you. Who's responsible for the properly timing? Who's responsible for the timely filing of the Form 990? Is that the executive director or is it the board? Who truly has that responsibility? If you think about duty of responsibility, Kevin, you're exactly right. That's the board. Now, the board makes it a job requirement of the executive director, and then the executive director, if not done, the board should evaluate them on that. But it truly is the board's responsibility. It's the board's responsibility to make sure that grants are applied for on time. It's the board's responsibility to make sure that if we have any unrelated business income, that we're taking care of that and we're treating that properly. It's the board's responsibility at board meetings to make sure that the bylaws and the governing documents are adhered to. Yep. And I can see it in your replies in the chat. So many people push these things to the executive director, but I will assure you that when it blows up, if it blows up, and if you go to the Attorney General's website, they have a list of investigations that they do every quarter, and I review those. I truly go through the investigation, and you'll find 8 times out of 10 that it's the board that the Attorney General is holding responsible for some noncompliance. We have the treasurer file the form. That's great, Fred. And who files it is great. But whose responsibility is it? Whose responsibility is it to make sure it's done timely? The board has that duty of being compliant. Now, and I've seen this before. How does the board have that duty when the board doesn't always know what the compliance features are? One of the little tricks that I've seen organizations use is that they put together a calendar of the key dates, the grant due dates, the 990, if you have an audit, or all of these dates that are compliance, the Attorney General annual registration, and they incorporate that calendar into their board meeting so that the board has to take a little more responsibility. One of the reasons that we find that the board does not take on the responsibility of compliance is because the board doesn't know. The executive director and the staff take care of all of this stuff, and the board just doesn't know that some of these things are being done until the executive director reports back, say, hey, yeah, the 990 was filed. What I'd like to see is that more and more organizations move to a compliance calendar, and then those compliance matters start to roll themselves into the board meeting. So hopefully that's beneficial. Hopefully that makes some sense, because one of the simple things, duty of compliance, payroll taxes are paid on time, right? Who's responsible for making sure that happens? So there's a lot of compliance elements that truly exist that usually executive directors are taking care of, and the boards are very, very unaware or very assuming that, yeah, this is all taken care of and we're moving forward. So I'm going to answer Jennifer's question in just a minute, but the next item is to manage, or I'm sorry, duty to manage accounts. What do we think that is? Yes, Jennifer. Yes, Jennifer. Danielle's got it. All sessions are recorded. Columbus Foundation does a phenomenal job. Mark, income and expenses. What about income and expenses, Mark? What does that mean? Fiscal responsibility, budgets, and other financial accountability. Okay. Duties to manage accounts. Board members are responsible for the charity's financial stability and accountability. They accomplish this primarily by establishing procedures to help the organization operate in a fiscal manner. So I've got a couple notes on this. So they establish procedures. So as a not-for-profit organization, who is responsible at the end of the day for the policies and procedures that you follow? It's the board. Now, boards will absolutely push to the executive director, hey, we need a cash disbursement policy, or we need a cash receipt policy, or we need a policy on how we're going to take care of the tickets at this event, or whatever those things are. But that's the result of the executive director working for the board. At some point, the board has the responsibility of approving that policy. And then, if we go all the way back up, duty of care, making sure that policy exists. I have one organization. This is a crazy example. I know it's a crazy example, but I want to give it to you. I have one organization that's a single audit organization. Somewhere around $8 to $9 million is their operating budget on an annual basis. Each month, the board of directors receive a list of all the cash disbursements to sign off. The board signs off the entire list. And when I say signs off on it, it's not in the board minutes. It says, hey, we approve it. They literally pass it around and people have to sign it. Now, Kim, I think that's crazy. I think that's overkill. However, what that board has decided is that is the way we need to operate to make sure we're hitting our responsibility. So if I go all the way back to the beginning of the slides where we had the, and I'm going to try to go back to this real quick. If I go all the way back to this slide where we had different types of boards, the further to the right you get, board is figureheads at Ohio State and Ohio Health. They have internal audit procedures and internal audit teams that will go through and test policies and procedures to make sure they're operating and report back. Board as a staff, how do you make sure? Well, you probably make sure because you're doing it, right? So once we get into this middle area, managers, governors, and advisors, how are you determining that that the policies and procedures are being carried out and handled? Now, one of the last presentations that we're going to do here is, do I need an audit? One of the things, I'm an auditor. We spend, 70% of our year performing audits. That is what we do. We're going to talk about, do you need an audit? I want you to know an audit alone does not take care of duty to manage accounts. An audit alone does not satisfy this duty as a board member. We're going to talk about why that is in a couple months, but I just want you to know, if you believe that an audit is and you have an audit, I'm going to ask you to pull out your engagement letter on that audit and to read it. Really read it. As an auditor, I am telling you, I am not responsible for these things. Management maintains responsibilities. As an auditor, I'm not even required to find fraud. So I really want you to read that engagement letter and go through it if you believe that your audit is taking care of this for you, okay? So I really want to drive that point home. I thank you. I'm going to close out of the chat. You guys continue just because I don't have to have my eyes going a couple different ways. We're going to go really fast through strong boards so that we can finish up at the duties and have some time for Q&A. So remember, content Q&A goes in Q&A, and Danielle, And the Clemens Foundation team does a great job of pulling that out so that we can answer a couple of questions at the end. I really appreciate your engagement. I really appreciate your thoughts. And what I will tell you is that I believe that everyone's on point in their thoughts. I will just challenge you to go a step deeper, just a step deeper in each one of those thoughts to really go and to the next level of your thought process. We've talked about the responsibilities. I think it's of a board, the legal responsibilities. I think it's important that we talk about how do you know when you have an engaged board. And there's some things, and again, I've stolen most of this from other places, and I'll give credit to where credit is due. One of the things that I love about this slide is that it says develop a strategic plan. That is not an organization strategic plan. That is a strategic plan, one, to recruit board members, and two, to develop board members. As an organization, as a board, you should be working on a development process for each of your board members. I'm going to give you a personal example. So many people will call me and say, hey, Don, will you be the treasurer? Will you be the treasurer? Will you be the treasurer of our organization? And in all actuality, a few years ago, I just completely stopped because I do finances all day long. I do accounting all day long. Doing additional accounting on a board really wasn't adding to my quality of life, really wasn't expanding my skill set. It was about 5, 6, 7 years ago. I got a phone call from someone and said, hey, Don, we want you to be our development chair. What? You want me to be the development chair? I have no experience. And that's exactly, but we think you can do it. And that opened up a whole new world for me as far as just understanding how to fundraise, understanding how to ask. It has created a skill set for me as far as selling my work now. So that organization truly poured into me and allowed me to develop. That's what it means by a strategic plan. Develop some way that your board members are developing personally and professionally. So really hone in on that. We'll talk about one of the key features of that later. I think that most of this information on board engagement comes from Boardable. Many of you use it. Keep the mission clear and in front of them. Do they all understand your mission? Is it in front of them regularly? I know a couple of executive directors that required a mission statement to be read before every board meeting. I love that. I like that. The other thing that I like is that organizations that will put the mission statement at the top of every agenda, and it's there for people to read. And I also like for it to be a preamble into the board minutes. So just constantly keeping in front of people. Now, there's a lot of debate and conversation about what is your mission and how's that different than a mission statement and things of that nature. I'm not really going to get into that. What I will challenge you for too is that if you're an older organization, if you've been around a while and you've gone through a couple of different management and leadership changes, I'd really ask you to go back, and you can get it from the Internal Revenue Service, and ask for something called the Form 1023. Form 1023 is the document that you apply to the Internal Revenue Service for tax exempt status. That is what the Internal Revenue Service has as your mission, unless you have intentionally and purposely told them something different. So we have a ton of organizations that have one mission statement on their website, and one mission statement they're promoting, and another mission statement that may be setting with the Internal Revenue Service. So I just I'd love for us to reconcile those two. And then that is what I want us to really, once we get those reconciled, to really keep out in front of people so that we don't have mission drift and we don't start doing things that we should not be doing. Get the right people in the room and ensure they can contribute. And we talk so much about this is, do we have the right people on the bus and are they in the right seats on the bus? It's just the hardest thing to do from a management standpoint. And whose responsibility is this sit with? Is this the executive director or is this the board? Well, it truly is the board's responsibility. They're going to enlist the executive director a lot. And hopefully the board president and the executive director and can't think of it right now, the committee that's in charge of bringing new board members to the board are all really tied in and working through this process together. Passion is important, but to be a truly effective board needs members with expertise, skills, and insights that most align with the organization's strategic goals. My executive directors hate me for this. It is a harsh statement. When I look at engaged boards, I look for boards that have the skills over boards that are passionate about a mission. Man, if I can get both, that's what I want. If I can get both, that's what I want. But I tell you, I see too many boards, especially on the small side, that are made up of parents in a children organization, or made up of pet lovers, or made up of people that are really passionate, but they don't have all the skills to execute the requirements of a board. So I really will challenge you to make sure that you're balanced there. This is my growth. At one point, I would always say passion doesn't matter or mission doesn't matter. Mission matters. Mission absolutely matters. But we want to make sure that we're balanced there. For instance, I get some people that call me and say, hey, Don, I need a treasurer. And man, I would really like for them to be passionate about X. Well, in today's world, the opportunity to get a treasurer is so small that maybe you just want a treasurer, and maybe you'll do everything in your power to get them to be passionate about X. But bottom line is you need a treasurer. So I think that there's a balance to be struck there. I'm not going to tell you where you're at. I'm going to ask you and your board to do some self-evaluation to figure what gaps do we have? What gaps do we need? And everyone will tell you, you know what, we need a fundraiser, we need an attorney, and we need an accountant on the board. And maybe, but what I'm going to ask you to do is, okay, what gaps, where do you struggle? Maybe there's a ton of contracts coming across your desk, and maybe instead of an attorney who deals in divorces, you need an attorney that deals in contracts so that they can look at those contracts real quickly. So I just will continue to press into you to look at what you're doing and look at the skills that you need to accelerate what you're doing, and to determine that what you're doing is the proper thing. So get the right people in the room, and the right people in the room is different for everyone, depending on where you're going in the stage of your organization. So I really like that. If you can, take that bullet point out and just think on it a little bit and see where you get to on that. There's a great book called The Board and the CEO by Peter Greer and David Wesley. Some of the things that you've seen so far came out of that book. Some of them came out of, as I said, Boardable. The book, The Board and the CEO, really goes through a concept of how those organizations operate. And one of the things that, well, I'll do this. Oh, no, I think I've got a slide out of order. I'm sorry. One of the things that they'll talk about, and we'll get to it, is that at a board meeting, the executive director very rarely should be speaking more than 20% of the time. The board meeting is really a time for peer-to-peer interaction, peer-to-peer accountability. We have to remember that the executive director works for the board. So it's really hard for the executive director that works for the board to hold the board accountable. And I hear that so often with the organization. And the reason that we get into one of the reasons we get into those situations is because we don't have peer-to-peer pressure taking place at the board level. The board members need to be holding each other accountable. That's why if you have a strategic plan for the board, one of the things that I love, I've sat on a board once before where it was important for us that we had board members attend events. Well, we would keep track of each event, who attended, and how many board members and how many events as a board member you've attended. And that was something that was reported out at every board meeting as a dashboard. That created peer-to-peer pressure. Let's be very clear about that, because I knew that if I didn't attend, it was going to be shared with everyone. So that the CEO and the board really talks about how do you create that peer-to-peer interaction at the board level to help you have an engaged board. Just a statistic, we know that we're having a leadership issue in a lot of different places in the United States. This talks about 75% of the executive directors are going to be retiring in the next 10 years, and only 14% of board members are under 40. And the reason for that is that the people that I know are people like me. And this is a common theme that we have, that I'm not going to go down this path in the United States. We just need to interact with people different than us in order to bring people into leadership. If we continue just to perpetuate ourselves, then we're all leaving at the same time. I just talked to an organization this week where the CEO, the board chair, the internal accounting, the outside CPA, and the lead program person all left within 2 weeks. Why did they leave? They all retired. They all retired. Now, everybody's just trying to figure out, how do we do this? So we have to be very tuned in to succession planning. Most organizations do it at the CEO level. They don't always do it at the board member. I have one board where the CEO and I have already made a side agreement that we're leaving together. Well, that's going to be damaging to the board. We're trying to, and we shared that. We have shared that openly with all the board members. So we're trying to get them to bubble up and take on some more leadership. So just something to think about. Challenging conversations. Just be aware of rubber stamp boards. We don't want boards that just rubber stamp things. I want to take just a moment here. Again, Peter Greer, David Wheatley talked about this, job descriptions. It's really important that not only do we have job descriptions for our staff, but we have job descriptions for our boards. Boards will use those job descriptions to recruit and to evaluate. I've got a board right now that's trying to evaluate their executive director, but they never put a job description in place. And we all know that you can't evaluate against, or you can't evaluate when you don't have a job description. So how do you evaluate your board if you don't have a job description? There are sample board job descriptions out there that you can Google. There's resources. I would highly recommend that you put together a job description for your board. If you have an advisory board, I would recommend that somebody do that. When I say you, I'm not talking to you as the executive director. I'm talking to you as the organization. So job descriptions become really important, because without that, we're not able to do evaluations. Communication, regularly pattern of communication. I just spoke about job description. I just wrote a job description for a board where one of the requirements is that they seek out the executive director between meetings just for 5-minute check-ins, just for 5-minute check-ins to find out what's going on. This board felt that was important. One, so the executive director knew that he, in this case, he was supported, but it also allows them to get involved in some of those duties in between meetings. One of the things that is really hard to get people to understand is that 28 or so days out of the month, the board truly works for the organization. You're advocating, you're fundraising, you're doing all of those things. 2 days of the month, and I say 2 days because I think it takes a day to prep for a board meeting and the board meeting. Those 2 days, you need to be running the organization as a board member. Very interesting and difficult relationship, because you're flipping throughout the month of whether or not you're working for somebody or or someone's working for you. So to manage that is difficult. And I think that the more that we can communicate and the more that we have written plans, it's important and it's helpful. Here's something that Peter Greer talked about in his book. Every January at the request of the board, I send a list of 5 names to my board chair. These are people who I believe could do my job and do it incredibly well. While I have no plans of transition, I actively involve these individuals in the organization so that they might be an attractive candidate when it comes time for the next CEO. That's truly great succession planning. One of the things that you'll see in the for-profit space, when the for-profit space loses somebody, they've already tapped the next person. They're constantly looking around and evaluating the landscape. Not-for-profits don't do a great job of doing that, in my opinion. So, and we don't want to hurt another organization by taking a key person from them. So we have that relational piece that's a little bit of a struggle also. I highly recommend that we figure out a balance and that we do take some time to look around and say, okay, who is it at XYZ that could step into these shoes? It's important from a succession planning standpoint. So again, I'm not saying that you need to go and raid other organizations. That's not what I'm promoting, but sometimes the best candidate does have a job at another location, and we just need to be able to identify that person. All right, hey, Danielle, if you can get ready, because I think I'm going to skip a bunch of the boardable slides because I've covered a lot of them. And I just want to end back up with the duties. Duty of care. Please go and get the Attorney General Manual. Go and get it, read it. I've just picked out a sentence from each one of these. Go through it. They give you examples. They tell you what they're talking about. It's very important that this becomes a common piece or a common document that your boards utilize. So I really want you to go and grab that Attorney General document. If you have trouble finding it, reach out to me. I can send you a link to it. And maybe I'll even try to find it while Danielle poses a couple questions and put it into the chat. So Danielle, with that, I went long. I didn't expect to go long. I thought this was going to be quick, but who knows when I start talking. So thank you.
No problem. You went a little long. I thought maybe I would message you and let you know, but then what you were sharing was so beneficial. I was like, we'll just let him keep going. It's fine. So folks, now's the time to add those questions to the Q&A box as you have them. I have a series of questions for you as well. I'll start with the one that's currently in the Q&A box, and we'll build off of that. The first question here is, what would you recommend for term limits?
Yeah, that is, oh, Kevin, you beat me to it. Awesome, man. Appreciate that. So term limits. I like to talk about the life cycle of organizations whenever I talk about limits of anything. Um, I I don't think that 1 year or 2 year terms is enough. Um, but I think that when we get to 6 year, that's probably a lot. So somewhere in that mix, maybe that 3, 4 makes sense, but we must stagger them. And we also must figure out a way that we grow leadership within inside of those term limits. That's hard. It's hard. Um, I would really suggest looking at a cycle for your business or your organization and trying to determine what makes sense within that cycle.
That makes a lot of sense, and the importance behind term limits lends to something else that you discussed earlier around, I'm going to call it board diversity, but we're thinking about infusing new thinking, different types of talent, different people on your board regularly to keep the energy up. Can you talk a little bit more about board talent, board diversity? You started to go down the path a little bit about what types of skill sets could be beneficial on a board. Could you just talk a little bit more about that, just giving us some ideas of what types of skill sets we need? I'll explain
Sure.
a little bit, just to say that I get the question a lot of, we want to have an accountant on your board. In fact, that comes up every single time that you have a forum, is how do we recruit an accountant to our board? We need to have a lawyer on our board. What are some of those types of skill sets, but also some non-traditional skill sets we should look for in board members?
Yeah, and here's what I think. I think the non-traditional skill sets are more important than those traditional, because you can always buy the traditional, right? The traditional ones you can buy, and you can utilize them to mitigate. I know that from a traditional skill set, people will ask me, "Hey, Don, do I need an accountant on the board?" And my answer to them is depends on your relationship with your external accountant. If you have a relationship with an external accountant that is going to be engaged, then maybe you don't need a pure accountant on the board. Maybe someone who is just savvy enough to understand some basic financial statements. The non-traditional things, Danielle, I think in today's world are becoming more important. I think that it's I think that it's important that we start to understand the value of influencers, social media influencers. I think that we start to that it's important that we start to understand how those platforms work. I think that it's important that we get people that a great example. I'll use Fellowship of Christian Athletes as an example. A great organization that I'm associated with. But what we're lacking there, we're lacking the recreational coaches, the recreational league coaches, who are truly touching students even outside of the school year. So there's a skill set, there's a population that we have never tapped into that would help us maintain a relationship with that student year round. So I think marketing, social media is becoming so valuable and intertwined with that. Contract, somebody that really understands and can look at a contract. I'm looking at a new lease space, and we're talking about a $200,000 to $300,000 decision, right? Because the lease term is 7 to 10 years. We're talking about a huge decision, and if I don't have somebody review that contract, that's just not smart. So now, do I understand the financial aspects of it? Yes. And could I have an attorney on a board review? Yeah, but if they don't review contracts, all they're going to do is come back to me with more questions instead of to say, hey, you want to get a specific answer to this, this, and this. So I tried to say it, Danielle, and I probably didn't say it very well. Those unique skill sets and those skill sets are truly, when you look at your organization and your organizational growth, truly the things that you need, truly the things that you as an executive director or you as a board are doing that you're not good at. That is where you identify your gap. And I'm going to use yourself just real quick. So many of these organizations, and I had one executive director do it, and it was the most uncomfortable thing that they did. Business First does a great job of telling us who's the 40 under 40, who are the rising stars in our city. And I had one executive director go through and truly cold call those folks to try and get meetings to see if they would be interested in joining their boards. Was that the best thing to do? I'm not sure it's the best thing to do. Did it show that that executive director truly was intentional about diversity and adding young, different talent to their board? Absolutely.
Honestly, I think that that's a really interesting concept that I would not have even thought of before. And probably the folks on that list might be, this is the first time they're hearing about this organization. So, you know, kudos to that executive director for trying something out of the box, and hopefully that was really fruitful. I thought that the numbers you shared were really shocking around, you know, the 75% of EDs will be retiring in the next 10 years, and only 14% of current board members are under 40. I think we're seeing that play out in a compounded way, at least in our local sector, post-pandemic. Well, we're not really post-pandemic, but, you know, post-crisis period of our pandemic, where we're seeing burnout at an all-time high. And those succession planning pieces and making sure that your board is intact is really important in spite of that. We have tons of questions here. Thank you for putting those in there. One of the first question is, how do we find out what the legal requirements are for filing with the IRS, and understanding, I'm adding a few words here, understanding about the, I guess, intricacies of paying contracted artists. Does the IRS say anything about specifics like that?
So I'm going to take this as twofold. So one is the filing requirements with the Internal Revenue Service from a organization standpoint and a compliance standpoint. You can always track down. The IRS has a really cool part of their website for not-for-profits called the not-for-profit cycle. So it will walk you through kind of a 3-year cycle of an organization. The other thing that I think you're trying to reference is the compliance regarding 1099s and paying contractors. There is language around that, and this is where it's really hard for a lot of executive directors, because you don't even know the language around the 1099 and the contractors and things of that nature. And I challenge my board members so often, hey, bring your for-profit thought process into the boardroom, because they're at a business someplace right now generating those documents. But when they get to the board meeting, they don't ask, hey, what are we doing? So every now and then it's really important to ask outward to the board, hey, what's the big issue that you're having at your for-profit, or what's the thing that you're working on at your for-profit, to determine whether or not it also is a factor in not-for-profit space.
Thank you for that. We have another one here that asks, do you have any financial key metrics you suggest monitoring as a board? For example, 6 months cash, run rate, administrative expenses, people served, etc. You actually did a forum on that not too long ago, so check back on our YouTube channel and you might see some more information about that.
Yeah, the financial storytelling, I think, was the forum that we talked about, trying to put together those. So I would go to that, but generally speaking, my recommendation is to drill down into your organization and determine what makes your organization go. What is it that makes your organization go? What gives the organization juice? And those are the things that you track. Burn rate is always a vital thing, but let's take an organization like the American Red Cross. Burn rate is not overly important for them to track, right? They've got enough assets that a lot would have to go wrong before they ran out of cash. So I think that there's a cycle and a understanding of what it takes to make our organization grow and go that dictate what we track. I think that there are some basic things. I think boards and organizations probably need to do a better job of tracking some of the things that are required to be reported outward. Cash liquidity or liquidity of a financial statement, and what your liquidity requirements are. I think those are important to track to see what the gap is, either positive or negative. And then I also think that being able to, on a consistent basis, track our administrative spending and compared to our total spending, not to say right or wrong, just so that, as we talked about at the storytelling forum, that we have a story around it.
All right. And do we have, should the organization have an audit committee that's separate from its finance committee?
Only if you have a big board. Only if you have a big board. That's always a preference. But what I find as an auditor, that so many people in the audit committee really don't understand audit either. So I find some organizations where I end up making 3 presentations, and I'm not sure there's any benefit other than their bylaws dictated it. So I think it boils down to skill set and value that additional committees bring.
Okay. We have here, do you suggest bringing the board along? How do you suggest bringing the board along with education, and knowledge of their responsibilities? So an ongoing board education.
So I think that things like this are important. The Attorney General, it's very interesting. If you haven't gone to their website, and we look at the Attorney General from a compliance or punishment standpoint, they have a ton of resources. For instance, you can assign short, brief videos on these things to your board members and get reporting back when the board members listen to it, so they went through it. So there are tools that you can, again, I say you as an organization, not you as an executive director, you can assign out to your peers to make sure that everyone is staying on board. I think there's a couple of people, Dean is in the chat. There's a couple of people around town that truly function as board coaches. And I think that becomes a valuable resource as well.
Wonderful. So in the beginning of your presentation, you presented a matrix on the different types of boards that exist. And one of the questions that I see pop up a lot in the sector, particularly as orgs are evolving, is we currently have a working board, or boards as managers, and how do we, or actually we're there, but we want to be a board as governors. How do we help our board make that transition? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, clearly define what's the board's role and the staff's role. And so I'll take you all the way to the far end, okay? Because when we go to figureheads, it becomes easy to see, right? Mm-hmm. And I used to say this a lot until I understood there were multiple boards. If the Walmart board's not talking about it, I don't want to talk about it, right? The Walmart board is a pretty high level figurehead type board. Mm-hmm. So you start to just move down that if you will, that slope. And at some point, even things that you think you want to talk about, if you want to stay as board as governors, you can't. You can't. You have to turn those responsibilities over. And it becomes important that the executive director is willing to take those responsibilities. So that's where it becomes a hand in glove type relationship to determine how are we going to operate. You have to get to the point that you have very good job descriptions so people know where their responsibilities start and stop, and they don't start to bleed over into each other. So that's the way you do it, Danielle. You go back and you reassess, okay, what have we been talking about, or what have we been dealing with that we probably shouldn't be for us to make that move, or we should be for us to make that move.
Sometimes I think I see that question the most in as we transition from founding board members into other types of boards. And so the way I typically answer, in addition to the awesome answer that you just gave, is thinking about upcoming board recruitment, reviewing your bylaws to examine, making sure that you have term limits engaged there, looking at how you onboard new board members so they understand what their expectations are. The language is built in there so that folks know I am joining a board that requires X, Y, and Z of me, and not a bunch of day-to-day administrative stuff.
Right. Yep.
So that's one way to look at it too. I'm thinking also about, we have another question here. Our board appears to have a combination of the types of boards or board members on the matrix. Seems to make sense. So do you see that happen commonly where boards fall somewhere? Is that, I guess, sort of a fine thing to happen where you're at different places on the matrix, or does that an indication of maybe dysfunction within a board?
So I will say this is where I will say that 2 days, if you go back to what I said earlier, 2 days of the month, we have to all be in alignment. We have to definitely be in alignment 2 days of the month when we're running the business. The other 28 days of the month, we need people in every function. Every now and then, we need people to volunteer as staff, and we need people to be out on the street just advocating for us. So those 28 days of the month, we need everybody across those, because the job is big. But those 2 days, we have to be very clear on how we're operating, which is the challenge, because 28 days of the month, I've been a staff member. Now you're asking me to come in and be a governor. That's hard, but that person has got to understand it. And then when we talk about board job descriptions, those board job descriptions primarily are focused around the governance, not the other, if you will, 28 days. Those 28 days are other duties as assigned. Okay. So those 28 days, we can be wherever we want on that spectrum, truly. And we need people in every, but those 2 days, we got to hone in on what are our decision-making processes and how do we make sure that we meet our legal requirements.
That's definitely true. And I'm also thinking around how I see that mix. You correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but I think I see that mix happen a lot in smaller to mid-sized organizations, more so than in our larger ones. So to me, that means that your board is needing to roll up their sleeves more often and jump in on some of the more perceived management tasks than a board that is a figurehead and the board that are governors. So all boards are acting in that governing space. That's their responsibility, the legal and fiduciary responsibility of a board. But some boards will also, in addition to those, be required to act in a managerial capacity for something. It may not be for everything, but it could be here and there, some things you need them to do. So my thought is that it could be that you're probably more in one of those verticals than you think you are, as opposed to being spread out. It's just that you might be more in that managerial linear than in some other space.
And please, and this is the flaw of the chart. Please don't necessarily try to put yourself in one bucket or another. Get comfortable at the beginning point and the ending point of the board responsibilities. That's what's most important, is that we identify who's responsible for what and how we carry it out. I have yet to find boards are very easy to identify themselves as staff or as figureheads. Once you get into the middle between the managers, governors, and advisors, there's a whole bunch of mess. To try and figure out which one you are is hard. But what I want you to do is, like Danielle said, get very good at saying, here's our responsibilities as a board, and here's the staff's responsibilities, so that we don't cross over. And sometimes that board member, depending on the staff side, will typically have some staff responsibilities. We've got to make sure that we're evaluating that right and that we're planning for that right. But man, it's not about labeling yourselves. It's about understanding where beginning and ends points are.
That's definitely true. So we have reached the end of time for the forum today. And I think Donald, you and I could sit and chat for hours, but no one wants to see that happen. So we're going to close up shop for today. But I want to say thank you so much again, Donald, for bringing your knowledge to us. We have 2 more sessions from Donald coming up in August and September that are talking about the 990 forms and about audits. So stay posted for those forms coming up. And you'll receive in your email inbox a link to this forum, and also a link to the survey. Please do fill out that survey. You'll also get the slides to this. So all of the things you saw today, you'll get the slides as well. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me. And with that, have a wonderful afternoon and rest of the week. Take care.
Danielle, get some rest. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.